You never forget your first encounter with something wrong. Mine happened at 3:17 a.m. on Route 83, just past the Utah border. The darkness out there, it's a different kind of dark. Not just the absence of light, but a thick, heavy kind of black that swallows everything whole. Most nights, it's just me, the hum of the engine, and the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching out ahead. But that night was different. I was cruising, feeling that familiar lull you get on long hauls. I'd been on the road for 17 hours, pushing to make my delivery in Denver by morning. A woman in a pale dress standing on the shoulder. She wasn't waving. She wasn't hitchhiking. She was just... car trouble? But even as the thought crossed my mind, something in my gut clenched. There was no car, no flashing hazards, just her, silhouetted against the meager moonlight. And then I saw the smile. It wasn't a comforting smile. It was stretched, too wide, too thin, like a piece of rubber pulled taut to its breaking point. Her eyes, even from this distance, felt like they were fixed on me, boring into the very core of my rig, and by extension, into me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles went white. Every instinct screamed at me to hit the gas, to floor it, to leave her in a cloud of diesel fumes. But the road was clear, and there was no reason to suddenly accelerate. She didn't move, didn't twitch, just that smile, fixed, unwavering. I reached up, adjusted my rearview mirror, the plastic groaning with a wet, sticky click, like something trying to pull free from a damp surface. Maybe less. Felt like a lifetime. I checked my mirrors again. She was right there, as if she'd taken a giant stride, covering dozens of yards in the blink of an eye, like a broken doll's head, dangling but still fixed on me. That smile was even wider now, if that was even possible. It seemed to glow in the dim light, a beacon of something profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. It felt like she was in the truck with me, her eyes drilling into my soul, her smile stretching wider and wider as if to consume me. My heart hammered against my ribs. The truck felt cold suddenly, despite the heater blasting. I tore my gaze away from the mirror, forcing myself to look straight ahead. I swallowed hard, a dry, rasping sound in my throat. The first thing I did when I pulled into that desolate truck stop, the kind where the diner coffee tastes like battery acid, and the only other living souls are the occasional lonely trucker or a mangy stray dog, was to check the dashcam footage. I needed proof. I had to have proof. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my laptop. I hooked up the external drive, the one that stores all the raw video, and started scrubbing through the night's drive. My eyes, gritty from lack of sleep, and the gnawing dread in my stomach, scanned the screen. No head tilted at an angle that would snap a normal person's neck. Just the familiar mundane reality of a nocturnal cross-country haul. My breath hitched. For a second, a flicker of relief, thin and fragile as tissue paper, wavered inside me. Maybe it was just exhaustion, a hallucination brought on by too much caffeine and too many hours staring at the dotted line. Because the image of her, frozen in my mind's eye, was too vivid, too terrifyingly real. I remembered the unnatural stillness, the way her smile seemed to stretch beyond the bounds of human anatomy, the chilling intensity of her gaze. No, it couldn't have been a trick of my mind. So I did what any trucker who'd just seen a ghost would do. I leaned in closer. I started rewinding, frame by agonizing frame, watching every flicker, every pixel. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hitting the enhance key, then zoom, then sharpen. I was desperate. Desperate to find something, anything, that would confirm what I'd seen with my own eyes. The screen glitched. A sharp, high-pitched whine screeched through the cab's speakers, making me wince. But then the whine subsided, and the image on the screen, though still grainy, became clearer. And there she was. She was there in the side mirrors, tiny and distorted, but undeniably present. That pale dress, that stretched smile, her eyes, like twin holes, punched into the darkness. She was there in the glint of the hood ornament, a miniature, menacing figure, impossibly still. I even saw her, a faint, unsettling shimmer, in the polished chrome of my coffee thermos, sitting innocent in the cup holder. Always that smile, always those black eyes tracking me. It was like she was a virus, clinging to every reflective surface, a phantom hitchhiker riding unseen in the echoes of my own perception. The dashcam designed to capture reality was lying. It showed a perfectly normal road, but within that normal was a hidden, terrifying truth. She wasn't just on the road. She was in the reflections, a part of the very light itself, waiting to be seen, waiting to be acknowledged. And now that I had seen her, I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that she wasn't just a fleeting apparition. She was following me, and she was real. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was a fluke, a glitch in the camera, a trick of the mind. I pulled into the next truck stop, a place called Rusty's Rest, a real dive, figured a little human interaction, some bad coffee, maybe a chat with a fellow road dog would clear my head. I needed to hear another voice, a real voice, not just the drone of my engine and the whispers of my own increasingly paranoid thoughts. I was just getting ready to head into the Greasy Spoon Diner when the CB radio, usually just a background hum of random chatter and trucker jargon, crackled to life. Usually it's just guys griping about traffic, or asking about way stations, or maybe some friendly banter. But this time, it was different. Marty's a veteran, been driving the Wyoming route for 30 years, seen every kind of weirdness the road can throw at you. Hearing him sound like this, it was like hearing the bedrock of the world cracking. "Ben, is that you old son of a gun?" My hand instinctively went to the mic. A cold chill snaked up my spine, a premonition, a sickening feeling that I had just walked right into it. Marty didn't laugh. His voice, when it came back, was urgent, raw, laced with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Ben," he repeated, his voice dropping even lower, as if he was afraid of being overheard, even over the airwaves. The coffee thermos in my cup holder seemed to glint ominously. The memory of the dashcam footage, of her in every reflection, flashed through my mind. It wasn't just me. Marty knew about her. She wasn't just a figment of my sleep-deprived imagination. You don't stop, you don't slow down, and you sure as hell don't look at what she's carrying in her. It wasn't just a normal break in the signal. It was a violent tearing sound, like fabric ripping, like someone was shredding the very airwaves. I fumbled with the volume, trying to clear the horrifying noise, but it persisted, a banshee wail that echoed the terror in Marty's voice. Young, innocent, but with an underlying current of ancient malevolence. The static died completely then, leaving behind a horrifying silence. No more chatter on Channel 19, no more casual greetings, just the empty hum of the truck and the pounding of my own frantic heart. I stared at the CB radio, at the silent mic, my mind reeling. It pressed in on me, a suffocating blanket of dread. Old Marty, the unflappable veteran, had been cut off, mid-warning, by something unspeakable. And that whisper told me that whatever she wasn't just a visual anomaly. She was a presence, a force, and she knew what Marty was trying to say. I didn't try to call him back. I knew it was useless. A final, terrifying punctuation marked Marty's incomplete warning, and it left me alone with a horrifying truth. I was being hunted by something that defied explanation, something that could reach across the airwaves, something that had silenced a seasoned trucker with a single, chilling whisper. Whatever she was carrying in her left hand, I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I never wanted to find out after Marty's chilling warning. Or what was left of it. I drove like a man possessed. I didn't stop at another rest area. Didn't even pull over to piss. Just kept that rig rolling. The roar of the engine a desperate attempt to drown out the echoes of that child's whisper in my mind. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the road was getting to me, but the cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach told a different story. Every shadow that danced across the windshield looked like her. Every glint of chrome reflected in the truck's dashboard seemed to hold her stretched, malevolent grin. Finally, just as the first faint hint of pre-dawn gray began to smudge the eastern horizon, I found a desolate pull-off, a barely there patch of cracked asphalt off a forgotten service road. The sudden silence was deafening, pressing in on me, making every creak and groan of the cooling metal sound like a monstrous sigh. It's my sanctuary on the road, my little slice of home in the endless expanse of highway. I tried to be smart about it. I locked the main truck doors from the inside, double-checked them. Then, I locked the sleeper cab door, the one that separates my bunk from the driver's seat. It was a flimsy latch, mostly for privacy, but I figured it was an extra layer. Smart, right? But I did it anyway. Clinging to the illusion of safety, I crawled into my bunk, pulling the bunk curtain shut with a sharp tug. The heavy fabric, usually a comforting barrier against the outside world, felt like a thin veil, easily pierced. I stared at the digital clock on the small panel above my head. 3:03 a.m. My heart skipped a beat, so close to 3:17, the time I first saw her, Every nerve in my body was screaming. I closed my eyes, trying to force sleep, trying to push away the image of that stretched smile, those black tracking eyes. I must have drifted off, or maybe I was just hovering on the edge of consciousness, trapped in that hypnagogic state where dreams and reality blur. I lay there, rigid, listening, my ears strained, trying to decipher the sound. It wasn't on the main doors. It was right there, not on the door, on the curtain, the heavy sound-dampening bunk curtain, just inches from my head. It was a soft, muffled sound, like someone pressing their palm against the fabric, then lifting it, 3 deliberate times. Each knock vibrated through the air, sending shivers down my spine. It was too precise, too deliberate, too close. I lay there, frozen, listening to the pounding of my own heart, which seemed to be trying to beat its way out of my chest. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. A branch? My hand slowly, shakily, reached for my phone. For the thermal camera app I sometimes used to check tire temperatures. A long-haul driver gets good at improvising. I aimed the phone at the curtain where I'd heard the knocks. The screen flickered to life, showing the ambient heat signatures of the cab, the warm glow of the dashboard, the cooler outline of my body in the bunk. And then I saw it. Right where her hand should be, pressed against the curtain, the screen showed a patch of deep, impossible blue, a void of color, -40 degrees. In a heated cab in an area where my own body heat was radiating, there was a spot of absolute unimaginable cold. A cold that could only mean one thing. Something utterly inhuman was on the other side of that curtain, reaching in, touching the fabric, leaving behind a chilling imprint of its presence. As I stared at the thermal image, the 3 knocks came again. This time, they felt colder, sharper, more insistent. And as I watched, a wisp of breath vaporized in the air right in front of my face. This was the breath of something impossibly cold, something that didn't belong. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing myself against the far wall of the bunk, trying to disappear into the mattress. She wasn't just in the reflections, she was here. A promise that she could come through the fabric, that she could step into my sanctuary whenever she pleased. I lay there, shaking, until the first rays of the true sun pierced through the gaps in the curtain, dispelling the worst of the shadows, but doing nothing to warm the profound, bone-deep terror that had settled in my soul. The days that followed the sleeper berth incident were a blur of caffeine, white-knuckled driving, and the constant, gnawing fear that she was always there. I couldn't sleep more than an hour at a time, jolting awake from nightmares of impossible smiles and freezing cold. I tried to convince myself it was just a cumulative effect of stress, the isolation of the road, but the memory of those icy knocks, the thermal camera reading, and the vaporized breath were too real to ignore. I was on my last leg, pushing for my final drop-off in Arizona. The company was already calling, wondering why I was so far behind schedule, why I sounded like I was running on fumes. They didn't need to know about the spectral hitchhiker clinging to my rig. And then, last night the sky opened up. Not just a sprinkle, not even a downpour. It was a biblical deluge, a solid wall of water hitting the windshield, turning the highway into a shimmering, dangerous river. The wind howled like a banshee, rocking the massive truck, trying to tear it from the road. I had the wipers on full blast, their rhythmic thwack-thwack, the frantic drumbeat against the storm. I was focused, my eyes straining to see through the sheeting rain, my hands locked on the wheel. But then, as the wipers swiped across the glass, clearing a momentary arc of vision, I saw it. In the thin film of water left behind by the blade, before the next wave of rain washed it away, I clearly saw the words, "Look behind you." My blood ran cold. The words, clear and unmistakable, seemed etched into the very glass, glowing faintly in the dim light of the cab. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in my chest. It wasn't rain, it was a message, and it wasn't a friendly one. I squeezed my eyes shut for a fraction of a second, then forced them open. This wasn't just a haunting anymore. This was a direct, malicious communication. She wasn't just following. She was toying with me. My gaze snapped to the dashcam screen. I didn't even know why I looked. It always showed empty road. But this time, as a jagged streak of lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the world in a blinding, instantaneous flash, I saw her. The image on the small screen was grainy, flickering with the intensity of the storm, but it was horrifyingly clear. Her limbs seemed to bend and articulate in ways that were utterly impossible, her body scuttling over the top of the trailer like some monstrous insect, defying gravity and logic. Her pale dress, usually a stark contrast against the dark, was utterly unaffected by the torrential rain. It moved with her, impossibly dry, flowing around her as she contorted her body over the cold, unforgiving metal of the trailer. It was like the rain simply passed through her, an irrelevant detail in her horrifying reality, and her smile. With every searing flash of lightning, illuminating her grotesque progress, that smile split wider. It stretched further than before, ripping at the corners of her mouth, revealing rows of teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp, too wrong to be human. It was a smile of absolute, boundless hunger, as another bolt of lightning momentarily froze the scene on the dashcam. A faint, sickening sound that seemed to emanate not from the truck's speakers, but from somewhere deep within the very structure of the rig, or perhaps from within my own head. A wet, sickening sound of fabric tearing, followed by a horrific, guttural jaw dislocation crack. It was the sound of something tearing itself open. It was the sound of that smile expanding, tearing her own flesh to accommodate its ever-widening predatory grin. I slammed on the Jake brake, the loud, resonant roar echoing through the cab, a desperate cry against the horror unfolding outside. The truck shuddered violently, protesting the sudden deceleration. My mind screamed in unison with the brake's guttural cry. She wasn't just watching anymore, she was on the truck. I jammed the accelerator, abandoning any pretense of safe driving, just needing to outrun whatever nightmare was manifesting behind me. The rain, the road, it all faded into a blur. There was only her, and the primal need to escape. The next thing I remember is the blinding white, the smell of antiseptic, the faint, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor beside my bed, an insistent, mechanical pulse echoing the erratic hammering of my own. My head felt like it was stuffed with cotton, and a dull throbbing ache resided behind my eyes. The last thing I remembered was the rain, the truck shuddering, the sight of her crawling from the trailer like a monstrous spider, that ever-widening smile. A nurse, a harried-looking woman with kind but weary eyes, bustled over. "Mr. Davies?" She sighed, a tired sound. "You were found walking aimlessly towards the highway, about 15 miles from the Red Mesa rest stop. Disoriented. You kept mumbling about a woman, a smile." She trailed off, giving me a look that said, "Another one. Is it okay?" She nodded, a faint frown creasing her brow. "Coffee still warm in the thermos. Logbook updated to the minute you were supposed to arrive. Everything neat and orderly." Her voice held a note of bewilderment. "Perfectly parked. Coffee still warm. Logbook updated." The details hit me like a cold wave. How? I had been screaming, hitting the Jake brake, flooring the accelerator, fighting a demon on the roof of my trailer. How could it have ended up parked so neatly? It was impossible. He started asking me questions, routine stuff about my medical history, if I had any pre-existing conditions, if I'd been under a lot of stress. I tried to answer, but my mind kept drifting back to that impossible parking job, the warm coffee. It was too precise, too polite. Then he pulled out a tablet. My breath caught in my throat. It was my truck, gleaming under the harsh, artificial light of the digital image. And as he zoomed in, as the details sharpened, I saw it. The gleaming hubcaps, the darkened glass of the windows, even the side mirrors. In every single one, a faint, translucent image. And that smile, oh God, that smile was everywhere. Reflected in the windshield, distorted by the curve of the hubcap. A tiny malevolent crescent in the polished metal of the fuel tank. It wasn't just a fleeting reflection now. She was an integral part of the scene, woven into the very fabric of the images. And in one of the close-up shots of the driver's side door, a detail that made the blood drain from my face. A faint, dark smudge on the pristine white paint. A wet fingerprint smears. Not a normal fingerprint, but something elongated, distorted, like fingers that were too long, too thin. I felt a guttural scream rising in my chest, but it was choked off by the tubes and monitors. Distantly, I could hear screaming from somewhere else in the hospital, a sound that usually would have made me jump, but now just blended into the cacophony of my internal terror. It was like the world was echoing my own internal torment. The doctor, noticing my reaction, quickly put the tablet away. He sounded calm, professional, but his eyes held a flicker of something, perhaps concern, perhaps unease. He didn't see what I saw. She hadn't just tormented me on the road. She had ridden with me. She had been sitting there, in the passenger seat, all along, silent, invisible, smiling, waiting for me to break. And when I finally succumbed to the terror, she had simply taken over. driven the truck herself, left me out there lost and disoriented, while she tidied up, making sure no one suspected the impossible. And now, even here, in the supposed safety of a hospital room, I couldn't shake the chilling certainty that she wasn't done with me. 3 days of doctors looking at me with pity, nurses whispering about stress-induced psychosis. But no matter what they said, no matter what tranquilizers they pumped into me, I knew what I saw. I knew what happened. The memory of her on the dash cam, her impossible crawl, that tearing smile, and the perfect, terrifyingly neat way my rig was parked. It was all burned into my brain. I discharged myself against medical advice. Couldn't stand the forced smiles and the condescending nods. They didn't believe me. How could they? But the truth was still out there, riding shotgun in my truck. It stood there, enormous and silent, under the afternoon sun, looking perfectly normal. My employment was terminated due to health concerns. I didn't argue. I wouldn't have set foot in that cab again for all the money in the world. But I couldn't just leave it, not without a warning. I had a small, old-school tape recorder in my glove compartment, a relic from the days before everything went digital. I bought a fresh pack of batteries. I climbed into the cab one last time, the heavy truck door creaking mournfully behind me as I pulled it shut. The air inside was stale, metallic, and with a faint, almost imperceptible chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. I hit record. The faint tape recorder hiss began, a comforting sound in its familiarity, yet ominous in its context. The fear was still there, a constant, low thrum beneath my skin, but it had calcified into a grim resolve. I had to tell someone. Anyone. Good Halls. Used to be. I paused, gathering my thoughts, letting the reality of what I was doing sink in. This wasn't just a confession. Probably going to walk away from trucking entirely. Before you judge me, before you call me crazy, before you write me off as another burnt-out trucker who saw too many white lines. The part they wouldn't expect. The part that might, just might, save someone else. My gaze swept around the cab, the familiar controls, the worn steering wheel, the passenger seat that looked so innocently empty now. But I knew better. Not just the trip mileage. Look at the total. Does it match the last entry in the logbook? Like someone took it for a little joyride when you weren't looking? The thought made my stomach clench. I had briefly glanced at my own odometer at the hospital, too consumed by the reflections to truly register the numbers. But now, the question hung heavy in the air. Or would she leave a subtle, chilling hint? Second, your cargo seals. A microscopic bend that suggests they were opened, just for a moment, and then meticulously resealed. The memory of her crawling from the trailer like a spider, her pale dress untouched by the rain, made my skin crawl. The idea of her casually violating the integrity of the cargo, just to make a point, was almost as terrifying as the idea of her on the windshield. I looked directly at the passenger seat beside me, as if she were sitting there, listening, smiling. Not the sound of an empty seat, it was the sound of weight shifting, of someone settling in, making themselves comfortable. A contented sigh, like someone had just heard something they very much enjoyed. A soft, satisfied sound that chilled me to my core. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I knew then that it didn't matter if anyone believed me. She knew, and that was enough for her. I gripped the tape recorder, my knuckles white. The fear was overwhelming, but underneath it, a strange, grim determination. I had finished. I had left my mark. I would walk away no matter what it cost me. I left the tape recorder on the passenger seat, right where I'd left it. I had no idea where I was going, what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. I wasn't getting back in that cab. Ever. The fear was still a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but beneath it, there was a strange sense of liberation. I had left a warning. Maybe it was futile. Maybe no one would ever believe me, but I had done my part. I kept walking, kept moving. Eventually, I found myself at a bus station, buying a one-way ticket, too. As long as it was far from Route 83, far from Utah, far from the memory of that pale dress and that impossible smile. Days blurred into weeks. I found odd jobs, cash work, anything to keep my mind off the road, off the hum of a diesel engine, off the terrifying quiet of a sleeper berth. Every reflection felt like a potential trap. I knew she wasn't in the mirrors, not really. But the thought, the fear, it lingered like a phantom limb. One night I was crashing in a cheap motel room, the kind with thin walls and a buzzing neon sign outside. I couldn't sleep, as usual. My mind kept replaying the events, the cold, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. I flipped through the channels on the old TV, just looking for noise, anything to fill the suffocating silence. A CB radio bursts to life, not just static, but a distinct, powerful squelch, cutting through the thin air of the motel room like a knife. It was impossible. But then, the familiar hiss, the crackle, the characteristic sound of Channel 19, the trucker's channel, but it was undeniably there. It was my recording. The one I had left on the tape recorder in the rig. My own voice, raspy and strained, but clear, cut through the static. I could hear myself, detailing the horrors, the first sighting, the dashcam lie, Marty's warning, the sleeper berth incident. How was my private recording, left in a truck thousands of miles away, broadcasting through the ether, my recorded voice, dropping into that conspiratorial whisper? And your passenger seat, is it still warm? And then, just as it had on the tape recorder, the phantom sound, the creak of leather, the soft, contented sigh. It was right there, in the air, in the motel room, as if she were sitting beside me, listening along, enjoying my terror. My heart was a frantic drum, beating against my ribs. My recorded voice, distorted by the static, continued to play. If you're listening to this, good luck on Route 83, and if you see a woman in a pale dress smiling at you from the shoulder, the static intensified, a harsh, tearing sound, just like it had when Marty's transmission cut out. The sound was almost deafening, filling the room, vibrating through my very bones. I pressed my hands over my ears. The screaming static vanished as abruptly as it began, leaving behind a terrifying, absolute silence. A silence that was infinitely worse than any noise. And then, clear as a bell, directly in my ear, a soft, amused giggle. It was the sound of something vast, something patient, something utterly predatory enjoying a successful hunt. The unmistakable sound of a truck engine starts. Not my truck, not necessarily, but a truck. The sound of her setting off again, on her next run. The recording, my recording. No other voices, just the terrifying quiet, the exact duration of a full night's drive. The sound of her reaching the next destination. And then, at the very end, just as the silence seemed to stretch into eternity, a final, chilling whisper. It resonated in my bones. Got another one. She wasn't just looking for truckers, she was looking for listeners, and she had found one. And the last chilling thought that echoed in my mind before the silence truly swallowed everything was, because if they're not, she's already there, watching you, waiting for you to look.